writing, but not feeling like you have the background in writing or proper punctuation, or maybe your creative vocabulary is limited or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then also, because I've read your courses as well, I'm curious, as to if someone like myself can enroll into something like that. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, here's what makes a writer: showing up and writing. And like I would say, like study some of your favorite writers and see how many of them went to school. Many of them did, but many of them didn't. And they just felt alive with an artistic expression that they wanted to be a part of and that wanted to come through them. And then they just got really disciplined into it and they made it part of the practice. And I love that language of practice. That's what this is. It's a practice. Lawyers practice, doctors practice. It's like anyone that's committed to a life of mastery comes to it with practice. And I feel like so many of us, particularly women, I think often we have that sensibility around, um, if we're not experts, then many times women won't speak unless they feel like they're an expert. And so in this case, what we're doing, what the real focus on this, we're going to call it storytelling, we're going to call it sacred storytelling. And I would say we're also really wandering down a big committed path of looking at what is it to open your creative channel. And that's actually a practice all into itself, and a skill that's in a discipline, all into itself. So you don't need any experience to come. All you have to do is have like the willingness to play and to explore, and to be willing to really play with your edges, which is your discomfort, or when the critic comes up, or when doubt shows up, or when the comparing mind comes up. As long as you're willing to play with those, and you're willing to like move through them, then it's the perfect place.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Welcome, everybody. You guys are like, we got some serious early birds going on over here. A pleasure to see so many of you. I'm feeling very dualistic. I've got like light and dark on me, so I'm gonna move a little bit over here so I can get a little bit more direct light. Great to see so many familiar faces. We have a couple more. We have like one more minute before we begin, and I love just to hear where you're beaming in from. If there's something specific that's calling you here today, do you have a specific question? And there we go. Let's start. If there anyone else wants to say if something really specific is calling you, like I love that really specific question, Megan. Um, Otherwise, you can place your names and comments in the chat box, and we will begin. Okay.
You're beautiful.
Ah, thank you.
Is there time to talk before we start?
Well, if you have, we were just going to drop a line and say your name and where you're beaming in from, and if there's something specific that's calling you to this class today.
Okay, I had a specific breakthrough this on Monday.
Yeah.
I was in an Indigenous wisdom class,
Mhm.
and we had to do a tree ceremony, and amazing things have happened. So I wanted just to say thank you for having this, Leah, because it gives me an opportunity to process. Thank you.
Mhm. Yay! 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 Wonderful. All right. I'm going to do one little technical thing over here, and that is just to do like this. Hold on. Um, so while I do this, I'd like to invite you to put yourself on gallery view, and take a look around the room. Really take a real look around this room. Who is joining you on this adventure into the realm of sacred storytelling today? Who is willing to be daring like this?
I'm sorry, my gallery is very limited. I have 4 people and then a main person, and I don't know where to go. I'm trying to.
That's well then I would just say just look at them, and that's gonna be fine. Okay, so just taking a look around. And it's this dualistic thing that we're instantly entering into. Can you allow yourself to see and be seen at the same time? You allow yourself to see and be seen at the same time. So you're not doing a stare down, but you're really taking people in. And as you're taking people in, you're beginning to notice already, what are the stories that you're making up about people? And not making them right or wrong. Just noticing, what filter are you looking through? What is the lens that you are seeing the world through today? And one of the things I love about storytelling and storytellers is that we have the keys to this very unique form of liberation, where we can see a story for what it is. I see you today with that beautiful bookshelf of books behind you, and all of a sudden I'm deciding that you must be the incredibly learned Marty. You must be so smart and so brilliant. Look at all the stories I'm making. She could be in someone else's house for all I know. Those just might be like a stage set, for all I know. But let's look at the stories. Oh, she's pulling out a book. She probably wrote that book. But allow yourself to have fun, and allow yourself to be honest with the shadow story that might be coming up also. Are there judgments? Are there critiques? Are there criticisms? Are you finding that there's a pedestal that is just shown up, without even your choosing? Is some part of you putting someone above you or below you? And now you're just noticing, hi, Natalie, I haven't seen you in a long time. Yay. So just noticing. And now that you're in this place of noticing, I invite you to bring that external form of noticing outside of yourself inside, and closing your eyes and placing your feet flat on the earth, taking a nice deep breath. What if you could breathe air in through your palms, the palms of your hands? What if there was so much energy around you that all you had to do was open to receive? I invite you to take this next deep breath in as if you were literally breathing in through your palms, up your arms, into your chest. And notice as you do that, does your body have to change form or shape? Excuse me. I'm hoping I'm not going to open my eyes and see a bunch of dragons and butterflies, but who knows what just happened, Maybe you just need to roll your shoulders back a little bit to allow more air and space into that heart that might have just opened up a little bit. And as you're exhaling, just exhaling out all the energy, all the stuff that's ready to go. Really breathing out, exhaling out, letting it go. Bringing your belly button all the way back to the back of your spine. And this time as you breathing in nice and gentle and soft, what are your intentions for today? What called you here? We're talking about medicine stories. We're talking about working with story as a tool for healing, for self-awareness, as a way to really support the times that we're in, to play a role. We're talking about working with story as a tool that unifies. And in that conversation, what's calling you specifically? And breathe in that intention. And breathe it out. As storytellers, we are the ones who are seeing all the different layers of the story. We don't stop at the first layer. We don't stop listening to just the words that are being spoken. We also listen for what is not being spoken. We listen for what's being shown and what isn't being shown. And as storytellers, we hold the keys to both liberation, to escape a narrow story. We have the capacity to make any story larger and bigger. We have the capacity to hold as many perspectives as possible. We have the capacity to take away the duality of right and wrong and understand that right can't be there if wrong isn't there, and wrong can't be there if right isn't there. And so, wow, as storytellers, can we make space for all of the perspectives as having a place, of having a relationship? I would say if there's a place for our wisdom keepers to emerge, obviously it's in our elders, but also our storytellers are being called for as more and more people are calling for how do we live through these times. Not just survive, but how do we thrive? How do we truly live? So as I ask you this, I wonder with you, what are the stories that are asking to come through you in this time? Why did you show up for this class? What are the stories that you are calling for, that you are seeking? Perhaps today we'll play with it. If you're not finding them, maybe it's time for you to create them. I'm going to start with a quote for you today. And this quote, we have a lot of familiars here, so a lot of you have heard this, but I just love this quote, and so I'm going to keep reading it. We think we tell stories, but stories often tell us. They tell us to love or hate, to see or be seen. And often, too often, stories saddle us, and they ride us, and they whip us onward, and they tell us what to do, and we do it without questioning. The task of learning to be free requires learning to hear those stories, to question those stories, to pause and hear silence, to name them, and then become a storyteller. That quote is by Rebecca Solnit. Okay. So, this is a semi-interactive class, meaning that there are going to be times that I'm going to ask you questions, and when I ask those questions, they're real. They're like real questions. I really love to hear your voices. And so if you feel called to, if the answer wants to, if there's something that wants to emerge through you in those inquiries, I invite you to speak, because it's really fun to get to hear your voices. I always ask people to be generous with your succinctness, meaning that the more people who are succinct with what they are here to share, the more space there is for more people to be heard. You can also, so you can raise your hand, and I've got my eyes on you, and I can call on you. Also, if you have an idea or a question, you can always pop it in the chat box, and I will try to keep an eye there. Okay, so here we go. A little bit of background about me is that I came from a time of growing up, moving in between a farmhouse in Vermont, where I got to run wild and free, and really I would honestly say that my time of listening and catching stories started there, that there was nothing in the way between me and a wild imagination. And I was very lucky. I had parents who fostered my interest and love of stories very, very young. I got to study with some absolute greats when I was very young, true masters of the craft. And those masters of the craft brought me closer and closer to this love of theater and this love of storytelling and this love of arts. And so I ended up going and studying professionally in New York City at Sandy Meisner School. I worked off Broadway, and I interned at Williamstown Theater Festival in the summer stock. And I got to be around some just brilliant creators and producers and directors and actors. And I soon discovered that that was not my world. That the world was, for many reasons that I'm not going to get into. And my path ended up taking me towards this real love of social justice, love of the environment, and I ended up studying experiential education and wilderness leadership and environmental education, a fine school called Prescott College, and that led me into working as a wilderness guide for 7 years, where I would say my next phase of deep listening emerged, and my true love of the wilderness, and probably where the truest teachers that I know exist. And so from there, I ended up getting a master's in social work, and I had the great, wow, what a strange word that just came to mind, courtesy. But I would say I had the great honor of having a massive medical crisis. And in the middle of that medical crisis, I was told I could lose my voice. And it was such a gift, because it was I was at a crossroads in my life of, was I going to take the path of safety and doing the right thing, or was I going to follow the angst in my heart, which kept telling me to go back into the arts? And so nothing quite like potentially losing your voice that really puts front and center how valuable it is. And so I leaped. And I ended up starting a nonprofit called the Performance Initiative, which was all about utilizing the arts for social change. That led me to getting very active in utilizing the arts to get people involved with voting and politics. That led me to working with Al Gore and managing and producing the Green Channel at his television network. And that led me to seeing how strange news and information industry is, and how if I really wanted to make real change, I didn't think it was going to be there. It took me back to my true love and passion of story. Because all along the way, I had seen, and through these live events and through these performances, that something happened, something very palpable happened in the room when we came together and we, what I would now call, co-created a story together. And I wanted to understand how to harness that energy. And I wanted to know how to harness it for good. And what I would say was, that's a long story, but what I would say is where I live now with that is that I think that there is something very powerful and very palpable. And when you go in with a lot of intention, something magical can happen. And so some people gather in these circles and they call it ceremony. And now I work with story as a form of creating ceremony where people can come in and do transformational work and healing for both the individual and the collective there. That's a little bit of my journey and my perspective in terms of what brings me here to you today. So let's talk about what we're going to do today. I'm going to do, some of you, there's a lot of familiars here, so you're going to hear what you've heard before, which is my introduction to the landscape of sacred storytelling as an art form. How do we look at story as a sacred art form, not as something that's part of marketing, not as something that's going to sell something, but as the original art form. And so we're going to talk about an introduction of that. And then we're going to, so we'll talk about story and what is a sacred story. And then we're going to get into this topic of today is medicine stories. What is a medicine story? And I'm going to give you a recipe. I'll give you a couple of recipes to work for creating a medicine story for yourself, or potentially perhaps creating a medicine story for others. So that's what we're up to. Okay, so I feel like some of you guys should be able to say this by now, because I know that there's a bunch of people that have heard this over and over again, but here we go. I'm going to start calling on you. What do the Hawaiians say? The Hawaiians believe that words are so powerful that they can raise enough energy to slow the world or to set it into motion. I love this expression. And if you want to see this and get a palpable physical expression of what it is to be around people who know the power of their word, and that their words can actually influence the environment around them, can call the rain, they can speak to Pele, then I will get a plane ticket and go to Hawaii, be safe. But also you can go on YouTube and see hula and actually see what an embodied prayer looks like. The Sicilians say that words are so powerful that they poke holes in the universe. I often think about that as I'm feeling the temperature raise in my body in a form of disagreement, and how words can't be taken back. Australians say that the stories from the past must be sung to the present in order for the future to exist. The Maori say that words don't describe a thing, words are the thing. And all the ancient religions agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. I want to say that once more because I really want to invite you to take that in, that all of our ancient cultures agree that the world was sung, spoken, and chanted into existence. So when we start thinking about humans' unique role on this planet, can we please take the story that humans are bad for the planet and put it on a back burner and mark it as a dangerous story? When we understand that another way of seeing humans is that we are incredibly creative, that we are creators, and that we create with our words. And so this is a call for conscious creators. What does it mean to be a conscious creator? To understand the power of your language and how, I always think of the first inventor of, I guess the helicopter came first, right? It was inspired by a dragonfly. And I just always think about that fellow who was, I think he was French, who was thinking, he had an idea, it comes from somewhere, from this imagination, from inspiration, from nature itself. He had this concept that no one else had seen before. And he spoke it. And he spoke it with such a way, he believed in it. It was in his heart, right? We always talk about the distinction between a dream, a fantasy, and a vision. Just think for a moment. Just think for a moment. Where does a dream live, or where does a fantasy live in your world order? So if you could see a fantasy and just think about where in your body or outside of your body does it live? I now consider your dreams. Where do your dreams live? Why don't we go down this little eddy for a second? Who wants to say, where do your dreams live? Just in your body being. Yes, Marianne. Oops, you're on mute. You gotta take yourself off mute, love. You're still on mute. Well, she figures that out. Does anyone else want to speak? Where are you finding your dream in your energy body?
In the voice that comes from the heart.
From the heart. Okay. Who else feels their dreams coming from their heart? You can raise your hands. Yeah. Yeah. Who else? I mean, I'll tell you, when I've done this in big groups, a lot of people will say, I'm gonna skip ahead just a little bit. A lot of people, right, heart. A lot of people, when they say it, like when they feel their dream, it comes from their heart, right? And now a fantasy, a lot of times people will be like, oh, it's out there somewhere. And now you think, okay, now what's the difference between a fantasy and a vision, right? And a vision is actually something we bring to fruition. Oops. Marianne, did you come off mute?
I'm sorry, I did.
Great.
I'll get used to it. Now, when you said about what did you say? Where does our dream?
Yeah. But where does it live in your body?
In my gut. My gut responded.
Great.
So.
Thank you. So it's in the body. A lot of people will say, and maybe your dreams don't live in your body. There's no right or wrong. But I think it's a fascinating thing to think about when we speak something into being. Where is it coming from? And where does it need to come from to come to life? So, we're going back to the people who see things that no one else has seen. Tesla, the people who invented the first airplane. They were able to see something in their imagination, speak it in such a way that it could breathe and live life among us and actually change form into matter. I'm reading Ursula Le Guin's books, and she said, words are my relationship to matter. I love that she's very aware that she's creating through her language. Yes, New Republic of the, your name isn't there, a statement is there.
I am of the heart. Yeah, I had a strange thing happen yesterday in part of my body. It was my pineal gland. Mm-hmm. I started being dizzy, and I just said, I think I'm just going to go lie down. Mm-hmm. And I did. And something was happening within that area of my body. Mm-hmm. For practically an hour, I think I was like that. But after that happened, I've had all kinds of story epiphanies just bubbling out of me. And so I was so thrilled when I found you were going to do this today. So I just wanted to say that's the part of my body that has been activated.
Great. And I love how you bottle the deep listening, right? When something starts moving, they always say that a lot of times, like animals, when they go through a big trauma, they actually know, and children often know this too, to stay still. You get still for a moment, and then your body can calibrate and recalibrate, and then you can move on. So I so appreciate your wisdom of saying, whoa, something is happening. I'm going to rest for a moment. And then you modeled, and then what comes after? Oh my gosh, there's all this new life. What if you just tried to go on and doing, and you might not have caught those stories. So I hope you started writing them and taking notes, because they'll come fast and they'll leave just as fast as well. So abracadabra. And it's one of the most ancient words on our planet. It's from Aromatic mysticism, and it means I create as I speak. I create as I speak. And one last quote that I just cherish. This comes from Stephen Jenkinson. Wherever I go, there I speak. I can't go anywhere, nor can you, without speaking your way there. That's how you arrive. It's like a wake on a boat. It arrives to the shore before you do. So language is an exquisite tool in which we are made. Again, that's by Stephen Jenkinson. So now that we're kind of getting onto the same page about, the power of our words, let's get into this. What is a story? What is a story?
If I mind just a moment, I just wanted a little more clarification on how you summed up the vision part of it, because I know that you had mentioned about dream and fantasy, and then the vision part, I just wanted to kind of get that last bit.
Right. So now we're kind of coming into this idea of what's your vision of the future? So you really want to consider that for a moment and think about when you see, picture 2060, and what comes to mind. Where did those ideas come from? Is your mind being invaded by images of doomsday movies, Armageddon movies? By the way, here's a great thing for you to know, and Michael Mead has done beautiful work in reminding us what is the true meaning of apocalypse. We are in apocalyptic times. And if you don't know the meaning of that word and you believe that hijacked version of it, which is that, it's the end times, it's the end of the times as we know it. Apocalypse means a lifting of the veils. So you can see what's behind. It's the ultimate Wizard of Oz, end of the Wizard of Oz movie when they pull back the curtain. And that's what we're seeing right now. We're seeing our awareness around social injustice and racial inequity and all these things that are going on, especially in the United States. I know we have a lot of people from Canada here, but especially in the United States. You guys know our show is on right now. And it's not like this hasn't all been happening backstage the entire time. It's all happening, but all of a sudden we are much more, as a collective, aware. We have more shared language around it. We have more shared awareness around it. So yes, you can say these are apocalyptic times. And you can celebrate that we can actually see and name and relate to what's really here. So now coming back to this idea of vision, because Megan, I'm not losing you there, so it's like when we're as storytellers, we understand how powerful we are, right? And so in that we understand that sometimes you might have real intention to have influence and affect the world that you're part of. And so when you start thinking about a fantasy, a vision, and a dream, a fantasy is something of like, oh, well, maybe one day I'll go live in a commune with a bunch of people, but I'm not doing anything about it. I'm not really invested in it. It's not in my body. It's not in my heart. It's not in my gut. It's not driving my action. That's a fantasy, right? But if it's a vision, then it's probably got to have a life in it. If you're bringing your fantasy to earth and you're going to make manifest and transform your words into matter and change form, now there's got to be some life force in it, right? And now your heartbeat's got to be in it, your feet have got to be in it, your hands have got to be in it, and what in your vibration, someone I think said something about resonance, what in the resonance of your voice and your tone actually affects other people to start believing what you believe too. So you could say that love wakens, love speaks to love. We're seeing right now fear speaks to fear. It's like what I say is going to resonate that same thing that's in you. And here's a fun thing around pianos. Oh gosh, let's see if I can remember this. I'm so off script. You guys have taken me way off script. Now we've got to get into medicine stories, but this is great. But there's something really beautiful about the science of resonance, and you can see it with pianos, but basically it will, oh man, I'm sorry, I don't know the exact specifics of this, but it's a worthy thing to look up. But basically, you can things that are resonant that are resonating at a higher level will evoke other things to also resonate at that level. And you can see it actually happen in glasses. You can see it when pianos play, that they'll make other things in the space resonate that same place. So you can see it in a physical way, scientific way. But now think about it when, how does love feel in your body? Where does that live? How do you feel? Where does hate feel in your body, or fear? Let's use the language of fear instead. And where does that live in your body? And how do those resonate differently? So when you speak a love, even when there's fear in the room, you're going to speak more love, you're going to call out, But when we speak our fear, then it's all contagious, right? We are contagious. Our stories are contagious. And the things that are inside of them, it's a different kind of contagion. So how aware are you as conscious creators of the stories that you are giving life to? You know, another way of looking at this or speaking about this is that storytellers, they're the gardeners. You know, we've already talked about how powerful and potent they are to spread these seeds. But here's the illusion, and there's a trick to all of this. The storytellers aren't the real people with the power. I mean, they're magicians. They can cast spells. But it's the listeners that hold the true power in this dynamic, because the listeners are the garden. And you are the ones that choose which stories you choose to water. Which stories do you choose to propagate? Which stories do you take care of? You know, we could think about this as wisdom stories, you know, but we could also think about, look about what's going on in the world right now. You know, and I'm not saying don't look at what's happening. I'm not saying, oh, I don't want to experience fear, so I'm not going to look at what's in the news. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, as sacred storytellers, as the great alchemists of our time, how can you look at the whole story and then consciously speak the story that you want to happen into the world? You know, so here we are in a time when there's so much fear. Here's a time when we are, I mean, talk about a dynamic time to be on the planet. You know, if we, you know, talked about a storm on the Capitol and you put 15 people around that story, you're going to hear 15 different perspectives of what happened and why it happened and what people are doing. So I would say the other massive illusion in the game, in the realm of storytelling, is you think it's all about speaking. But the real magic and the real potency in it is in the listening. It's truly in the listening. How big can your story be? And, you know, true magic, what stories are most needed? So, wildly off track of the agenda for today, but let's get into this idea now. What is a story? Let's get all on the same page. What is a story? Thomas is saying a story is a description of a change. And I saw a big question in here. Thomas, or we'll bring some more of these questions in later. I just want you to know, because there's some good questions in here. There we go. One Woon Kian, I hope I'm saying her name correctly. Okay, so story is a description of a change. No change means nothing new and no motivation to attend. Right, so a story, it's not like facts and information. You know, I went today I got in the car and I put my key in the car in the ignition and it started up and then I drove to the airport and then I went through security. That's not a story. That is facts and information. Okay, a story takes you on a journey, but it also makes meaning. It infuses something into the room. It infuses something that wasn't there, that it infuses an understanding behind that, behind the facts and information, beyond the facts and information. But it takes you somewhere. It's building patterns, right? You know, one fun thing you'll see is stories there are often patterns in stories. You know, we like to have things told to us 3 times. And 3 is a magical number, and something in it, if you understand it, it's about cycles. It's about beginnings, middles, and ends. It's one of the reasons why storytellers, we can't help but say things 3 times. It can reveal things. That can just be its only job. It's just there to reveal something. I love that, Molly. So I'm going to move through this a little bit faster because I want to get you guys to have some time to actually create. And another way there's many ways that we can look at story, and a very pragmatic, boring, unpoetic approach is looking at a story very much like humans examine themselves in terms of the metaphors that we use. We often compare ourselves to the latest technology, and so using that frame of reference, I'm going to say that a story is an operating system. That's one way of looking at a story. And it's an operating system where we learn our beliefs, our values, and what we believe is possible. Look in our country, we have a wild 2 different operating systems. One operating system is saying, oh my God, we got a political leader that's gonna unify us. Others are working with a story of like, oh my God, the elections have been stolen and my you know, and whatever that means, you know. Like completely seeing the same thing and having 2 completely different operating systems in relation to it, because they're holding 2 different stories. Like, we couldn't have a more obvious expression of that. So that's one way of looking at stories. Now let's say, okay, now what is a sacred story? What is a sacred story? What distinguishes it? Gary, did I see your hand go up? Or you just, sometimes people, yeah. No, okay. I'm just waiting to see, I'm gonna go to some other pages. If you've been raising your hands, I haven't seen you. We have 3 pages of people, so I'm just gonna keep flipping through. What is a sacred story? Molly's saying it brings a universal experience. Right. So a sacred story has a place for many of us to live there together. It's not just about one person, it's about all of us. So there's that thing called a universal truth that lives in it. Megan's saying that it's a transmission of deeper wisdom. Victoria, I see your hand is up. Can you take yourself off mute?
Yes, I just wanted to say that a sacred story inspires the highest the nobility of what's possible in our humanity.
I love that. And so like another way, I love that it inspires the nobility in humanity. You know, another way of saying that is like, it calls out our highest self, you know, and then our highest self, so it speaks to a certain, you're saying that a sacred story calls out, what I'm saying is like, is the best part of your life force. I love that. It's a revival process. So it's not like a zombie story. So on the flip side of a zombie story is a story that's like life sucking and sucks the life out of you. It might infuse you with fear or with hate or with greed or with scarcity. So now just take a quick look around your room of your psyche, around your home. Think about all the different stories that are there and start thinking about all the stories that you're watching on television and movies, and start just thinking if you can have a slightly dualistic mind for a moment and think about, okay, if a sacred story is something that infuses life and calls out my best self and infuses me with some wisdom and awakens my heart and helps me feel connected and like the best part of myself, and I'm energized, and yes, I can save the world, whatever save the world means, but yes, I want to be part of this great new vision of a beautiful future. Yes, that's totally possible. Okay, and then there's the zombie story, which, oh my God, I think we should all just die right now. You know, and so I really invite you to start really, you know, putting on your super spidey sacred storytelling goggles when you start taking in the television, the news, movies, and say, is this a sacred story? Is this life infusing? Or is this a zombie story? Who is that story in service to? And I'm going to do a little spoiler alert, and I would warn that if a story is made for the sole purpose of making money, if it is in service to consumerism, to seeing you as a product, just wonder, what is it eating? What is it feeding on? So another way of looking at a sacred story is, in the way that I understand sacred stories, is that they have a life force in them, that they are a life force all their own. It's like inviting someone to the table. When you invite a wisdom story to the table, all of a sudden something that's more than you might come through that story. And when you bring a healing story to the room, or when you bring a story of fear into the room, what happens? And again, every time we have a choice. We have a choice to say, what story am I going to speak into the room? I had the most extraordinary experience. I was sitting with one of my dear, dear friends, John. We were talking about the state of the world, and you know, I was getting overrun by fear, absolutely overrun by fear, and anxiety was coming, you know, panic was coming, the whole thing. And luckily, my friend John loves to play. And I said, can we just play for a minute? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, can we tell the story of fear? You know, can we just like make a story about fear itself? And he was like, yeah. And so we made up this amazing story, you know, right then and there, about these 2 little kids who lived in this beautiful town, and it was the town of joy. And, you know, and everyone, the big tables of communion, there was food everywhere. The trees had tons of fruit just coming off, you know, everywhere you could go. There was singing and dancing and crafting and happy making. It was so boring. It was so boring for these young kids. And so they went to their grandparents and they said, hey, can we just, we heard that there were these people that were like live on the other side of the mountain. Can we go there? And their grandfather said, oh no, you don't want to go there. It's very dangerous over there. Those people were banished. It's bad. Don't go there. And grandfather knows, as grandparents know, that as soon as you tell someone, or especially a child, not to do something, that curiosity will come alive in them. And the grandfather, being a wise being, knew that to appreciate something that's so good, sometimes you have to be and understand and know what isn't so good. And so perhaps that grandfather had a bit of wisdom and was doing a little bit of teaching stories on the side, on the sly, because that night, late at night, those brother and sister snuck out of their home and they climbed over that mountain and they left their beautiful village with all the sunflowers. And as the sun rose over that other village, they started to see the grime and the grit and the misery that lived there. Because in their town, where sunflowers grew, in this town, there was like this purple slime that grew in the gardens, and everyone was drab and gray, and they all looked down and stumbled as they walked down the street, and there was no singing, and there was no dancing, and the tables were empty. And they were just about to turn around and run when the slime started to crawl up that mountain, and it surrounded them, and it surrounded them in such a way that they knew that they were doomed. They were absolutely doomed. In that moment of absolute complete doomsday, when they knew that they were going to be killed and eaten alive and would never see a good or happy thing again, the little girl remembered something. And she remembered the word that her grandmother had scratched, etched into the floor of their kitchen, because her grandmother had known that there might come a day when her children would need to be able to call on this superpower. For she had told them that if they were ever in great danger, when all seemed lost, all they had to do was call on this word. And so the little girl, remembering that word, looked straight into her brother's eyes, right as the gunk and the muck was coming and covering their feet. And she looked into his eyes and she said, "Chicken!" And he laughed. He couldn't help but laugh. And it was just a little bit of a giggle. And when he giggled, she giggled. And when she giggled, he giggled and laughed. And they started to laugh. And their laughter all of a sudden brought these sunflowers. And these sunflowers started to grow out of the earth. And it surrounded them. And as the sunflowers came, the gray, purple, gunky, slimy muck stuck and froze and cracked and crumbled. And they were free. And they cut down the stockings of those great, beautiful sunflowers. And they walked down into that village that had once been their great-great-grandparents, who had caught the seeds of fear that had fallen from the sky and had eaten it and fed it. And these children gave those ancestors of theirs each a sunflower and told them they could always come home. And so, thanks. And so that's an example of a medicine story. That's an example of a medicine story where, there we were, there I was in the pit of fear, and I didn't know how to get out. And I said, well, let's play with this. What can we learn? What can we learn about fear? What wants to come through that's not my literal mind, not my ego mind, but what does a sacred story, what will a sacred story inform me about fear? And I learned about the power of humor. I learned about the wisdom of grandparents. I learned that sometimes you got to see the muck in order to see the beauty. And I'm sure each of you heard different things in that story. And so when we look at medicine stories, I understand medicine stories, and I think a lot of people have different understandings of medicine stories. And so there's many different versions. And so I'm going to give you, 2 examples, and then I want to give you a recipe to go start playing and creating your own story. So, and we're going to have some time, and maybe someone will share one with us. That would be kind of fun. So, one medicine, you can say a medicine story is an old wisdom story. It's here to teach you something. It's got some It's going to heal something in you. Sometimes you just hear someone, I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but maybe if you've been in one of those moments where you're not feeling the love alive in you, and you're not believing that, romantic love is going to come your way again. And then some friend of you tells you this story about falling in love, just like that, just happened. They were walking down the street, they meet someone out of the blue, and the next thing you know, they're madly in love. And it's like, it's the real love. It's not just dumb passion, lusty thing. It's like the real thing. It just happens like that. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I believe in love again. Right, that can happen. So that can be a little medicine story, right? You got a little hit from somebody. You're like, oh, I've been infused with a belief in this again. Or a medicine story, and this is how I often come to medicine stories, is when there's something in me that is alive and aching, I will take that straight to the realm of story. But again, straight to the realm of sacred storytelling. And if there's anything that I can explain about what it is to come in live with the sacred story. So it's if we're looking at it, that it has that creative life force in it, and it has the muse in it, or that's another word for the muse. Someone might call it ancestors, or someone might call it guides, or someone might call it angels, or someone might just call it that creative life force. Okay, so we're saying that this story has a life force all its own. So how do you find that life force that you want to dance with? And so the first thing is to have a really clear intention, because you want to dance with the right partner, right? So if you don't want to we want to make sure that you're really clear with your intention. That's where the power and the potency begins. So if you're saying, okay, I want to, and I'm going to invite you right now, just to think for a moment about something in you that's ailing, something that needs to be met. It might be love. It might be that the story of scarcity is just pounding down your door and you need a break. You don't want to live in it in the same way anymore. Or you might have fear. Be really simple, just one word. Don't make a big story about your story. Just see if you can get the title of it. Okay, I just want the essence to it. So you've got this thing that you're like, I'd like some medicine, I'd like some wisdom. I'd like to get out of my spinning story that I can't get out of because it's always the same story and I don't know how to jump out of the loop, right? So now we're going to go into this relationship where we're going to call in that sacred story that's going to provide some guidance for you. And it's going to bring you some awareness that maybe your ego side doesn't have. So when we're looking at that, this is the trick. I'm going to give you the trick. And I don't say that there's a lot of tricks in storytelling. This is the only trick I know. It's completely about getting out of the way and non-doing. So think about going on to, if you're a tango dancer or salsa dancer, and you know that in those dances, there's this real magic that happens when there's a leader and a follower, okay? And they come together and they know their roles. And in that extraordinary a surrender to the leader, the leader and the follower then make one dance, right? They create a union that creates something all that's its own being. And so this is what I'm inviting you to think of when you open to the leader, which is your muse in this moment. So you allow yourself to be danced by the story. Another way of saying this is you're going to do a free write. You place your pen on the paper and you get out of the way. And you just let it go. And especially the less you know about where you're going, the better off you are. Okay, so you're allowing yourself to be inspired. And if you don't know what to say, you just say, I don't know what to say. And then you can and then, that's a great way to rescue yourself. And then what happened? And then all of a sudden, pink candy balls started to fall from the sky, and everyone opened their mouths, and they turned into watermelons, and they were finally the drought was finally came to an end as the water just came straight into their mouths. Who knows? But allow yourself to open to the inspiration, and then, as any great tango or salsa dancer knows, they got a few of their own moves. You have your own worldview. You have your own craft, your own perspective. And so you're going to weave those in along the way. Just don't think that you're in charge. Okay? That's the best. That's where the fun lives, is when you let yourself be danced. So you have this thing that you want a dose of medicine for. You want a way out of it. So you have your intention. And this is so easy, it's hard. And then you just write, once upon a time, in a land not so far away, in a time not so far long ago. You don't have to do all that. You can just do once upon a time. It just brings us right into the mythic and jumps us right out of this reality, and now you're in. So I'm going to invite you to do a 5-minute free write. And some of you might want to actually write. And some of us, when we catch stories, we catch them so fast that you just want to do bullet points. You might want to even map out, just draw the different parts of your story. Okay. We'll just be here for 4 minutes and then we'll come back. So if you need to take any notes, to jot down any ideas that are in you that you haven't had a chance to actually weave in yet, capture them, make some bullet points. And come on back. Did anyone catch a story that they're kind of in awe of? And I say this because I think it's a humble process, right? Like sometimes we get to catch a story and we're like, whoa, we're just the first ones, but we're like, yeah, okay. And do we have people that are feeling a little bold and like they want to try sharing their story? Okay, I'm going to call on some names that we haven't seen before. So, oh gosh, okay, great. So I'm going to ask you to do something almost impossible. And I'm going to ask you to keep it pretty short, pretty succinct. Okay, so and I'm going to ask you not to read because the story is so fresh in you. It's alive. And I'm going to ask you, Reva, to go first. And you can, and here's what I'm going to invite you to do. Don't fake it till you make it. You're going to practice acting as if you know the story. Okay? And the difference to me between faking it, like faking confidence, and practicing confidence is that when you fake it, that oftentimes we find these people that end up with these imposter complexes. And look at the language that they're using. All that time that they're practicing, they're telling themselves that they're fakes. Our language is really powerful. But when we tell ourselves that we're practicing, we're committing to being on the path of mastery. Okay, so we just practice our greatness every day. And so, Reva, take it away. You're going to practice as telling us the story as if you've known it your whole life. Have so much fun, and the more fun you have with telling it, the more fun we're going to have with receiving it. And we are catching this newborn firstborn birth of a new creature among us, right? So there's no judgment in us. It's just like we're in awe of the new life that is coming before us, and we're here to catch it and have fun with it. Okay, here we go.
Well, I'm winging it till I sing it. I prefer that one to faking it till I make it. I'm winging it.
Right.
So I'm winging this story. Once upon a time, I was me, and I found out I was you. And you had taken over my body. You had taken over my blood, taken over my heart. You'd taken over my mind, and I couldn't figure out why I knew that you had taken me over. And so I searched, and hiding inside my pericardium was me. And I couldn't figure out why I had allowed you to become me. Where was me? What was I going to do? I needed to get me back. And so I just started pulsing and radiating this sense of knowing and trusting in me. And it sent that out to my blood, it sent it out to my cells, it sent out the message until everything started singing and resonating together. And I knew that I was me again.
Thank you. And so what do we do here? But we oftentimes put our hands together, and we give her some sunshine to say thank you. And Reva, you get to practice just receiving. You just gave us a gift, and we're just saying, oh, thank you. We're giving some energy back to you. So thank you. And if you want to just say, what did you receive from her story? You can put that in the comments. You can just say, what did you receive? What came through to you? What came alive in your body? What did you experience? And that's how we give the beginning parts of feedback when new pieces are coming in. Fred, can you hand us a short story?
Yes, my stories always begin with a piece of string, which is just one thing, but it has two ends. And then there's a magical way to put the two ends together. And then instead of having an end, it becomes endless. It's a loop that just goes on and on. And then the magic of the fingers get involved. And again, we have the two back to visit us. And there's a really magical piece where the three emerges. And now there's three. And then we can go back to four. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, the rectangle. And there are really powerful magics in 5. And there's the 5. And I could go on through 6s and 7s and 8s and 9s. but then we get back to 10, which has the 1 in it, and it's all just 1 from the beginning.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Good. Little note in there. So we are coming to the end of the hour, and I'd love to be respectful of time and respectful of your time. And here's what I would like to say is that I'm going to read you a quote to end out our time together. And for those of you who caught the bug and are like, wow, I want to learn a little bit more about this landscape of storytelling and how, more ways that you can play with me, I'll give you a couple of different ways that we can play together. And then if anyone has questions about what we've gone over or even wants to share a little bit more of their story, at the end, we can make some more time for that. Okay? So I like to keep our, that agreement of we all said we would come here for an hour. So I'm going to leave you with this quote, and this quote I'm just going to keep quoting Stephen Jenkinson today. He is a wisdom keeper. If you're needing to listen to some resonance that can rest and still your bones, I definitely recommend going and listening to anything. You can find them on YouTube. Act as if you were people of consequence, so that I can treat you as such, and that you matter. That word again, that you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence of this world? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being of consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. And it would be proper to proceed that there is consequence to us being here. That is by Stephen Jenkinson. I'm going to pop that in here if any of you would like that. So may your stories have consequence. And may you know of the consequence of the stories that you carry and all the different ways that you carry them. Okay, so here's what I'm going to share with you. If there are ways that you want to continue to play with me, there are a couple of different ways that we can do it. If you're saying, this is kind of fun, like just getting my feet wet, and doing some story prompts, and I'm kind of into that, I have some ebooks that you can just go and get today, and you can be playing with story recipes and story prompts, and away you go, and you'll be late for dinner, but you'll be having a great time, and it's a very immediate gratification. If you are someone that where you really actually want to start learning with other people. And the other thing I would say is that we're also gathering on Facebook. There's a Facebook group called the Story Sanctuary, and so that's you could find a bunch of like-minded people, like in this webinar, right there, talking about story and in a deeper way, where you can share your stories. We can find the stories of our time and share them and have a really rich conversation. And if you're interested in experiencing a mystic storytelling experience, once a month, and it's coming up on January 15th, I host a monthly hour-long class called Hour of the Wolf. And it's I practice a form of ancient mystic storytelling where I literally divine a story in real time for the people who are present. So it's a way of receiving a medicine story in real time. And then we all get to talk, and it's a much more intimate experience where we get to explore where and how is that story living in our consciousness, and what does it reveal to ourselves, and what are we finding. And so you get to have it's much more interactive, much more conversational. And so that's called the Hour of the Wolf. And you can see that if you want to see upcoming classes, you could always cruise around this link. And we'll send an email out and you'll get all these links then too, if you're wanting immediate pieces. Then if you're saying, you know what, I want a real deep dive, this whole thing of dancing and being danced by the muse and really going in for a deep dive of where is my creative life force, how is it living in me, what's blocking it, what's in the way, and how do I, and really having a consistent community where you get to play and the experience of expression. So we do a little bit like this, but you'd also get into small groups, you'd get to share it, you get a lot of feedback, it's a lot of fun. The next course that's coming up is called Unity. And Unity, each of these courses come, they're in 10-week blocks. So that one is a 6-week class and one is a 4-week class. And the way that this was created is that I used to create these 9-month classes, and I would bring in all these bigwigs like Stephen Jenkinson, Michael Mead, and Carolyn Casey. We'd have this amazing guest speakers. But what I found was that we could only touch the surface in those classes. We didn't get to go in dig in real deep, and we didn't get to really see what was in people's way of telling their stories. People learned a lot of skills, but they didn't get all the blocks and barriers out of the way. So I developed over COVID this new model of teaching, which I like a lot more, and I'm noticing that people, they get to go real deep and they get to come out with something very concrete on the other side of it. So for this class, it begins with Unity, and it begins January 19th. It's 6 weeks. It focuses on the second chakra, which is your creative life force, but also it's where where a lot of us come into relationship with sensuality, sexuality, creative expression. That's the second chakra. And so we're going to be looking at what are your blocks and barriers between how you experience unity and connection with yourself, with other, and with the world as a whole. And so we're going to go on we'll go explore in your inner world and find everything that's there. And then you get to have creative exercises. So then we're working with creativity and storytelling as a way to maneuver and transform and play with what you explore. So this is really a class where you'll get a lot of skills and tools about how to activate creativity and how to move energy in your life. And we'll do it in a physical way, literally in your house by creating a sacred space, and also in a way of getting to play and come together and work together in small groups and start finding the material for your stories. So we do that for 6 weeks. Then we're going to take a 2-week break, and then we go in for 4-week teaching stories. And we will come out, and that is a class where we focus on just writing and creating one story that uses the mechanism of a teaching story. And so, a lot of times we've known that a lot of times we'll think of teaching stories that coming from different indigenous cultures, where these are stories that are literally there to teach us how the world works. And so you'll get to learn teaching stories from around the world and from many different cultures. You'll get to learn how to carry some of those stories, and you'll get to create your own teaching story from your own fountain of wisdom. And it can be told in a mythic way or in a literal narrative way. So that's what's coming down the pike in terms of classes. There's also one other one. It's a 1-day class. If you say, well, I love classes, but I'm not interested in a 6-week class or a 4-week class. I just kind of want a 1-day class. Well, you're in luck, because I'm teaching a class, I think on January 24th or 21st, called Claim Your Story, Change Your Life. And that is my modality of how to work with a story really as a tool for healing. So if there's something in your life where you're like, wow, I feel really, really stuck, and maybe it's my love story, or maybe it's my story of scarcity, or maybe it's my story of fear, or I was told I wasn't wanted as a child, or I've always been this role in this victim, and you're saying, wow, I don't want to play this role in how I'm living my story anymore. And this is a great class that teaches you a 4-part modality where you can learn how to take this old story and truly transform it using ritual, using creativity, and come out with the next chapter of your story. And so that's coming up on January 21st. And for anyone who gets so inspired and you're like, yeah, this is my thing, we will inspire you to really take that step towards igniting your creativity by adding a bonus of the whole sacred storytelling library of master teachers. So the amazing collection of over 33 hours of classes with Michael Mead, with Stephen Jenkinson, with all these just luminaries that will help you really deepen your understanding of storytelling so that your expression can be truly magnificent when we play together. So, do you have any questions? Sunshine fingers, right? I painted gold on my fingers today. Oh, sunshine fingers like that. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, Fred.
I just wanted to ask you if you had any knowledge or experience about the Jewish tradition concept of the Magid. I had never really heard of this person before a few weeks ago, and I looked it up, and what the explanation that I read said was, well, the rabbi is the one who speaks to the learned and the literate, and the Magid is the storyteller who brings the sacred word to ordinary people through storytelling. And I love that concept. And it also, in a way, sort of balances. Profane is such a bad complement to sacred. There's the mundane, and the sacred is a better opposition. And that the sort of the esoteric and the ordinary or out in the world part, and those, it just sacred has a lot of fraught connotations.
I so appreciate that. And I had never heard that. Would you type that up and because I would love to be able to read that and take that in even more. Thank you. I'm answering questions as I go. Alex is asking for ebooks. I'm putting the link in again. I'm getting another question. How does a child who'd been neglected and gaslighted by the mother practice storytelling and create genuine family stories? Okay, so here's what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing in this. So how does a child who's been neglected, I would say, create healing stories where they're not holding that story of not being lovable. Okay, so I just put my words on this. I just want to find you who put this on and just make sure that I'm finding resonance in my relanguaging of that. And I'm looking for you. Sorry. From One Quen. Are you still here? Thank you, Andrea, for bringing that question up. Okay, I'm not seeing, so I'm going to hope that my, that's what we do with storytelling, right? We hear something and then we say, okay, how can I speak this? So what I'm hearing is a question around how do we take a situation where someone has been neglected? A lot of the messages that come in from neglect is that you're not lovable, okay, or you're not wanted, or you're not desired. So these can be universal themes that can come through many of us in many different places in our lives. And so when you take something like that, this is literally what we do with Claim Your Story, Claim Your Life. I'm going to teach a little bit of the arc right now with this. Is the first thing you have to do, or you might want to do, is how willing are you to truly put the story down? Sometimes we convince ourselves, and then we convince others about how right we are about the story. I was neglected my whole life, and therefore I will always be neglected, and now you will neglect me because I'm telling you about how easy it is to neglect me. We repeat these stories, and then we convince people how right we are about them. So the first piece around changing a story or healing a story is, it's like you're not that person, you're not that child that happened to anymore, right? It happened at a certain time, and we can talk about this happening with any crisis or any act of violence or any just very painful act of suffering. It happened in one moment in time. But you're not the same person that it happened to. You're actually someone that's been influenced and affected by it. So there has to be this willingness to not allow that one moment to live as if it's frozen inside of you, and for allow it to shift and transform you. Okay, so that's one way. So there has to be an internal agreement to change the story. And from there, we, oftentimes when we take on big stories like this, we work with ritual, and we work with actually doing something physical in the world and calling on the elements to help us move the energy, literally. So there's got to be some part of me that's got to be willing to put down the I'm abandoned and I'm always being abandoned down. Okay. Then we start, one of the things that I like to do in these situations, and you saw me do it with the fear, I said, okay, here I am, I'm feeling so alive in fear. If I'm going to talk to you really literally about fear and my fear of fear, now my ego is going to get involved because we're working on this dimension. But if I pop out into the mythic dimension, now I have access to the muse. Now I have access to this other life form. Now I have access to a much deeper language of symbol, of archetype, of metaphor. What is metaphor but the language of spirit? So what I do oftentimes is we'll take that situation, we'll place it into the mythic dimension. And we're not retelling the story. We're actually doing this thing, and it's kind of hard to explain, and it's easier just to do. But we start working the story in that dimension, and now we start seeing the story of the soul, and it's a bigger story. So it looks like two people just neglecting each other, and this one, or abusing each other. And when you put it in the mythic dimension and you put it in relationship of symbols, you might say, oh my gosh, these two archetypal energies made some soul contract agreement, and now because of this, this point of suffering, it's activated the deepest core medicine and this other human, and now they know how to heal the suffering that comes with abandonment and neglect in other people, and now they've become this extraordinary capacity to heal. Now their latent powers have been activated. Okay, so that's one way of playing with that narrative. So basically what we do is we go in and we use creativity, we work with restoring our life, and the whole way it's like we're not making up new realities. And I want to really speak. It's not like we're going to gloss over and glamour and tell the story that you always wanted. Because if you don't believe it, it doesn't live inside you. So there's got to be a truth that lives in you so that the story can actually shift and change and take form. So that's a little bit of an example. Any other questions? And we'll see if there's any more stories that want to be shared. Any other questions? Hi, Andrea. Thanks for bringing that story up. I love it when we work as allies together. Andrea saw that someone had a big question and that it got missed, and she brought it back to me, and so I so appreciate that.
Thomas had one. I'm not sure you answered that one. Can you please check?
Where is that?
It's the first question that I sent you in private message.
Oh gosh.
Sorry. I think I only sent two at the end, so you should be fine with me.
Do you know of a medicine story that fire passions to save the world, including human civilization from climate change? Oh gosh. Thomas, are you still here? I'm just looking to see. Okay. Well, it's like, what the questions around is like, do you have stories that can help with climate change? And I think the biggest thing that I would speak to about that is that with stories around climate change, there's a pretty damaging narrative that people are bad for the planet. And a lot of the stories around climate change is that the end is coming, the end is near, and we have to race to save the planet. And when you hear all these narratives, there's something really, really key that's missing. First of all, is it a sacred story? Does it give you life? Does it give you life force? Because you can't run. It's like if it's trying to get you to sprint, life's a marathon. You got to be able to go for the long time. So if you're listening to a narrative that is like it's adrenal junkie, and it isn't actually true to what sustainable life feels like, then I invite you to immediately be suspicious. And the other thing I would say that's critically missing from the narrative right now is your role in that story. So when you say what would give people a passion to create a sustainable life, it's having that vision of what does it look like, and the role of and seeing yourself in that story. And that's one of the things that I feel like is very much missing from that world. Any other questions?
Sorry, Leah. You mean being disconnected? Like there's a vision, but you're not in it, so you're disconnected from the vision regarding sustainability.
Yeah. So, we're getting a little esoteric here. So it's like if you're talking about a story of the future and you want to get people involved and impassioned about it, it's like I can't speak too literally about it because we have to hear what your story is. And your story, if you're really wanting to engage people and employ people in co-creating the vision for the world that you want to see, there's got to be some juice in it, right? There's got to be some hope in it. There's got to be something that I want to see myself in, and you might just want to take this as a practice every day. practice 2040, or 2030, and practice, what would be something that you could see? And this is like really stretching our imagination muscles. And I actually do this, almost a couple times a week, where I just try to make myself see something that I really want to participate in, so that I know that it's there. And I know that just by taking the act of imagining it, I will start to take action to help bring that into fruition, right? So what are the things you most want to see on the streets? Or what tells you in 2040 that we made it? We made it into a time when we figured out how to use energy, how to utilize the energy on this planet in a really sustainable way, where all life is valued and respected and honored. What is telling you that we've learned how to be here and share resources? That's my vision of a good future. You might have a really totally different vision of the future, but what, so I would get really, I would get, in your heart, in terms of what is the thing that you most want to see, what are the things that tell you that it's happening, and now you start to draw that picture for others, and you start to employ them in it. You give them something to see themselves be part of. Right now, really well-meaning people trying to get you to take action are just giving you images and stories of horror and dread. And that's great. That gets you up off the couch, but it doesn't get you running the marathon. Okay. Any other questions? And then I know, I can tell, I can feel there's a couple more stories that came alive that want to be shared. All right. Who's got a question? You guys are hanging on. We've got some listeners. Who wants to share a story that came alive just now in creating that medicine story? Oh, you're just all in. You're in for the ride of what we're on right now. I can share with you one more story if you want. Okay. This story just came alive. I received it in Santa Fe, and I was meeting with Archon Lashwala, who is a Peruvian elder. And it's part of a project that I'm working on that's called the Listening Project. And it's a story around, and I've been working with and meeting with different Indigenous elders to receive and catch the wisdom stories and the prophecy stories for this time. Understanding that those stories were created to really, truly help us in these kinds of moments. So let's can we amplify these stories? And so I met with Archon, and I asked for a story that would help me understand how to meet hate. I was looking for a wisdom story that could help, I was looking around the country and I was like, wow, that could, and this is a great question for you also to really be with, like, what do people need right now? Like, what kind of wisdom stories do people need, and how can you be a part of surfacing them and bringing them out? And so, I asked him for that, and he thought for a moment, and he said, okay, I think I have a story for you. And I asked him for permission to share this story with you, and he gave me permission, and so this is how the story comes to you. There is this small village in Peru, just outside of Cusco, and it was of a time when the Spanish had taken over the land as if it was their own, and the Quechua, the indigenous people, were farming this land. And the Quechua people who were tending to this land noticed that their spring was going dry. She wasn't flowing like she normally did. And so they went to the man in charge of that property, or who had taken charge of it, and they said, there's a problem, the spring is going dry. And so he said, well, let me see. And so he comes out and he looks, and sure enough, the spring is going dry. And he yells at the spring and he says, you better start running. And it disappeared, went away, and went completely dry. Well, the Quechua knew that they were going to be in dire straits. There was no water for the people, but there was no water for the animals. There was no water for the land itself, and that this was of dire consequence. And they knew that there was this old woman, this witch, that lived way up in the mountains all by herself, because it was dangerous to be a witch in those times. You could be killed for being a witch in those times, of carrying the old ways and knowing the power of language and spells and the ways of the land and how to heal with medicines. But they went to her in a moment of desperation, and they asked her if she could come help call back the spring. And she looked at them, as many do when they're come to as last resorts, in dire consequences, slightly annoyed, but also knowing that she had no choice. When it's life and death, she had to answer the call, even though it could lead to her own death. Because she said, yes, I will come speak to your spring, but the man who owns that land has to be there while I do it. And so they brought him in, they brought her in, and she sang, and she lit the sacred fire, and she called, and she coaxed, and she created this field of magic where she was speaking between the layers, between the dimensions, seeing the life that this land was. But the spring, she still refused to come. And so the witch looked to that man, and she said, you're going to need to apologize. And something happened in him. His heart broke open. Something about her song, something about the presence of magic. And before he could even say a word, tears flooded down his cheeks, and all it took was the tears to bring the spring back to the land and for the water to flow again. And so
It's beautiful.
I share that story with you, the magic of story.
You know, I apologize. I came in late because I had technical issues, but this beautiful story you've just shared reminds me of the image that many Native American people and other traditional indigenous people have, that like everything is a river, life is a river, but not just the life we're living now, but our past lives, the ancestors' life is a river. And maybe instinctively, I have this long story on a blog, and it's begging for me to go back, but I will. But the thing is, I have a dialogue with the ghosts, with the ancestors, and it was basically triggered. Like, I was asking them to help me to see how we could heal the world of what's happening right now. Basically, at first it was the virus, but it was also all the wounds that themselves had. And like, we can heal each other, like among the living, but also we need the dead to do that.
Yeah,
And to
thank
heal.
you.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
I love that humble nature of yours also. Can we just come and ask? Can we quiet our mind? Can we be okay with not having the answer and just open to listen, to receive answers that are all around us? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, wonderful beings. It was a pleasure to be with you today. It was a pleasure to hear your stories and feel your enthusiasm and your deep presence, and stories come alive through the listening. And so may your stories come alive. May you listen to your own stories, know them, and be able to call them by name, and may the stories feed in others, that we can take a mute and wave goodbye, say all and adieu in every great language. Yes.
Hasta pronto.
Hasta pronto.
Tschüss.
Goodbye. Thank you, Leah, for everything. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Aloha.
Cook's Jam, Leah, and Cook's Jam, everybody else, and hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.